So we're gathered here to study Acts again. Who wrote Acts of the Apostles? St. Luke. Yeah, St. Luke did. This is really loud right now. Is it just me? My ears opened?
He doesn't have his hearing aids, so he can't.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, it's pretty loud right now. Maybe just a little bit.
The shoe fits where?
Yes, I know. Okay. Sheesh. Go away and come back and his rip on you. So at the end of chapter 5 last week, you probably remember the apostles were arrested again. And as they left, after the threats and everything, it says that the apostles left rejoicing that they were counted worthy of being whipped because they could suffer for Christ. I think sometimes Christians in the 21st century have gotten, at least in our country, we've gotten it kind of easy for time, and all of a sudden it's getting tougher, and we don't have thick enough skins, nor do we remember it's okay to rejoice when you get some kind of persecution. Most in the United States, mostly verbal or, that kind. But still, that we're followers of Christ to the point where we could rejoice that we're under attack. We don't always look at it that way, do we? Well, that's the introduction to what we're going to study today in Acts chapter 6 and 7. And this is the story of how the early church was challenged. The first section talks about the challenge that comes with division. They actually were challenged because they were growing. And the second half is the challenge that came to Stephen as an individual, where persecution now started for the first time in the early Christian church. So I want to talk about those first 7 verses first. Would somebody like to read those? So Acts chapter 6, verses 1 to 7. Go ahead, Roger, please.
One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them.
I think you're in the wrong book. We're in Acts.
Oh, we're in Acts.
No wonder why you got it so fast. You got as far as Matthew and...
Luke 6. Somebody else get it.
Anybody else got it? Edie, please.
Sorry.
In those days, when the number of disciples was increasing, the Grecian Jews among them complained against the Hebraic Jews because their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. So the 12 gathered all the disciples together and said, "It would not be right for us to neglect the ministry of the Word of God in order to wait on tables. Brothers, choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. We will turn this responsibility over to them and will give our attention to prayer and ministry of the Word." This proposal pleased the whole group. They chose Stephen, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit, also Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parsenaeus, and Nicholas from Antioch, a convert to Judaism. They presented these men to the apostles, who prayed and laid their hands on them. So the word of God spread. The number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests became obedient to the faith.
Yeah, interesting summary of the start of church councils. Oh, I thought you had a
I thought
point.
we covered this last week.
I don't know, you weren't supposed to have.
Sorry, let's do it again. It's good stuff.
Did you have this last week? You had chapter 5 last week.
Yeah, we have
Okay.
5.
Maybe it was similar.
It's simple.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the theme, and that's a good point, the theme in Acts continues to repeat itself. The Great Commission, you'll be my witnesses. And what did they bear witness to? The resurrected Jesus. And that comes up in every avenue. Now, in this particular, if you go back or even going ahead to Stephen, that's the same thing. He's accused of blasphemy. And he's quoting all the Old Testament stuff. So he wasn't blaspheming at all. But they had to find something to get him on, right? So, but here, the church grew pretty rapidly. All these Old Testament people on Pentecost became New Testament people. And that's why so many at one time, they knew the promises of God. Now they saw the fulfillment. It was an easy transition. Like the apostles, they were Jews, right? They were Judaism people first, and Christians, and followers of Christ. And so, but now we're doing a lot more in the way of outreach. And the persecution that started, like the Sanhedrin, openly hostile to the apostles. John and Peter get brought in to trial because they healed a lame guy, right? Or they're preaching in the temple courts. They were in prison, then they get, how did they get out? Where are they? They're not in the, well, here they are in the temple courts. They didn't run away. They just kept doing their work. And then they get hauled in again. Stephen, though, they didn't haul him in again. They killed him. But with growth, oftentimes comes stress on a congregation or the church. Are there any more back there, Liz?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So what was the cause of the trouble in the church in Jerusalem that we just read? What was the cause of that?
The Grecian widows were not getting the same attention that the Hebraic widows were
Okay.
getting in the distribution of food.
Okay, and if that wasn't addressed, it would have led to a division, okay? And there's something to be learned from that, by the way, especially for our council members. But it's kind of important, isn't it, for us to understand who the Grecian Jews were. In the Greek, of course, it's Hellenistic Jews, okay? Because Greece's real name is Helen. Right? Still is on maps today. All right, so who were those people?
Recent converts.
Well, not necessarily. They could have been Jews. So you've heard of the Jewish diaspora, right? So after the Babylonian captivity and so on, many stayed there, and they became very involved in trade. And so you have Jews all over the Mediterranean world. And what was the language of the day? The universal language was Greek. So these are the people that come to Jerusalem for the feast or for a pilgrimage, or many of them, they retired there. Okay? And that's probably what these widows were. They were from the outlying areas. They run from Palestine. And they were in Jerusalem at this point. And so you could tell the difference because the Hellenistic Jews, they would be people that Greek would be their primary language. They probably didn't even know Aramaic. They would know Hebrew from the point of view the Old Testament scriptures were in Hebrew. Most of the people of the day were bilingual, you know. And so that's who they were. And the Hebraic Jews were the ones that always were in Palestine, in Judah, okay? And maybe it is a kind of a weakness to deal with those you know at home first. But they were supposed to be treating everybody equally. And now Paul makes a big deal in Corinthians about widows. We'll get to that in the Corinthian class, those of you who are able to come. And so we're actually going to get to that in a couple of weeks. But the idea was, if you have family and you're a widow, whose job was it to take care of the widow? It's the family's job, right? The church shouldn't have to help if there's family to do it, okay? Now, in our day and age, widows a lot of times are very proficient on their own. They could own property today, when back then, not necessarily so. They could still get their Social Security or pensions or whatever. Back then, there was no income. And so the church recognized that our job is to care for those who can't care for themselves. So widows and orphans in particular. It was assumed men could still get a job. Okay? And now the church took upon itself, hey, these are our brothers and sisters here, sisters in particular, and they need our help and support. And so they helped them and supported them. We do the same thing here, just we don't always make a big deal of it. If we have somebody, we've had some widows in the past, some of them are with the Lord now, needed a hot water heater. The elders took care of that. They didn't necessarily do the work, but they made sure that it was taken care of because the person couldn't afford it. And we've done that from time to time. Food is a regular thing with Carmen Ford. We're supplementing her food every month now. That's the food boxes. 2 a month go up to her. And we're happy to do that. But we don't peddle that around because we don't want wrong kind of talk going on. Okay? And here, so the church took that on itself. But now the church is growing, and you have the 12 apostles because they had the fill-in guy. This is pre-Saul yet, pre-Paul. And they're recognizing that the need takes up more time than they had because their job is still the ministry of the word. Does that sound familiar? One of the things that can happen very easily is a pastor can think that the members aren't doing the job, so I'll just get it done. I can do it faster than you can anyway, so I'll just do it. But if the church is growing, that soon becomes untenable. And then all of a sudden you're spending more time on doing that sort of thing instead of preparing your sermon. Sermons just don't happen. They have to be prepared. And the pastor has to be growing in the Word too, otherwise you're not preparing properly. And you get nothing out of the sermon. Okay, I'm hoping you're still getting something out of the sermon. If you're stopped, then it's time to say enough. But I hope you're still getting something out of the sermons. Okay? And so one of the most important things a congregation could do is train leaders to do things that don't require a knowledge of Hebrew and Greek, what I'm called to do. So we just haven't had very many shut-ins over the last 5-6 years. And that's why we don't have a visitation team like it was when I got here. They would supplement. I think you were one of them, weren't you? And Karen might have been. Where you'd go out and visit shut-ins or the sick. Well, number one, people don't stay in the hospital very long anymore. Most of the time, I don't even get to see them in the hospital. And number two, now Donna died. So we're down to like 3 shut-ins now, 4 shut-ins. But that's all coming back in early next year. The elders are going to be bringing a visitation team back. So that'll happen one step at a time. But the thing is, anything that you could do to give me more time to study the Word and deal with people with the Word, the better the congregation is. Well, the apostles, this is the first time it comes up in the New Testament church. They recognize this is an issue for 2 reasons. One, we still have to take care of all of the people, not just certain ones. Okay? Because that's favoritism and that leads to division. And the second thing is, we can't give this time because it's a growing number and we don't have the hours in a week if we're still going to do what Jesus actually commissioned us to do. And what's their solution? Get some other people, yeah. And Edie, you did a pretty good job with the words, the names. The first one listed, of course, is Stephen. And why would he be first? Some would say Stephen, that's fine, that's the Germanic background. Stephen, why would he be listed first, do you think, by Luke?
He's a leader.
Well, maybe.
Coordinator, maybe.
Maybe, but he comes up the next chapter, so he's the one on the list he's going to talk about.
Luke probably knew it.
I would guess he maybe did. Well, no, he probably didn't.
Did he say the same thing Jesus said on the cross? Forgive them, Lord, if they did not.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that later. I'm not sure, because Luke came into the New Testament church through Paul's ministry. Paul's one of the persecutors here yet.
Yeah.
So Luke is not from Jerusalem. He's a Greek. So I would say probably not, but who knows for sure. He couldn't go back and talk to him because he was dead, but he obviously knew the story. Okay?
Luke's not an apostle either, right?
No, he's one of these 7 guys that were chosen to assist in the ministry, especially the social ministry. helping somebody who needs food or whatever, right? The widows. Okay?
Well, if he was Greek, that's probably why this story is here.
Just hold on to that.
Sympathetic.
Hold on to that. There's more to it. There's 6 more coming up. The second one's name is Philip. Why would he be number 2? Well, the next story after Stephen is Philip with the Ethiopian. Okay? The next 5, we don't know. It's kind of like the apostles, too. We know a lot about Peter and John and James. Not so much about half of them. You know, just their names and where they came from sometimes. Not much. Okay? And the next one's Prochorus. That's a Latin word. Okay? And then you have Nicanor. That also is Greek or Latin. Then you have Timon. That's close to my name. Timon. Tim, the first part. That's a Greek word. Timos is the word for honor. And then it's an ending on the end there. So the honorable one would be what the name means. Then you have Parmenas. And Nicholas from Antioch. That's interesting because that's where Paul's from. Antioch. And he's a convert to Judaism. So he's not a Jew, but he is a Jew by faith. Well, the rest of them were all Jews, just part of the diaspora. So they picked 7 guys that basically weren't Palestinian Jews to handle the issue with the non-Palestinian widows. Isn't that interesting? So somebody who's complaining about we're not visiting the sick enough. Guess who's the first person I'm going to ask to visit the sick?
I learned that lesson.
Oh, you did, didn't you? That's true, you did. Yeah. When people complain, I figure they need to do the work then they don't be complaining anymore. I learned that over 40 years of ministry. You kind of learn stuff like that. Okay? You're not the first, and you're not the last either. Okay? That's kind of funny, isn't it? But you can look at all the other stuff. The challenge of growth, the number of disciples increasing. Number 2 was the 12 gathered all the disciples together. So this wasn't just solved by the pastors and then down. They gathered the whole group of disciples. This is the first time the word disciple is used beyond the 12 in the New Testament. And so you see the transition. Anybody who's a student of Jesus is a disciple. Can't be a disciple if you're not a student of listening to the Word. Interesting. Okay, so he brings them together. And that's kind of how they were organized. They could do everything in the large group. Our church body can't anymore. We're too big. So we have conventions. Okay? You can imagine that the problem also is spurred on by language barriers and custom and culture barriers. There's something for us to learn about that too. Maybe not so much at Chino Valley anymore yet, but it's coming. Prescott probably a little bit ahead. But we don't have a lot of different ethnic backgrounds in the area. Like in California, I mean, I was a minority in my own congregation. When we went to Hawaii, you understand that you're pretty much a minority there too. And that's fine. I mean, people are just very, very nice and friendly. Got to talk and meet some, and I've never met a person I wouldn't talk to. I know that's hard for you to believe. But cultural differences exist because of our upbringing and where we're from. Some of us were brought up and grew up in the same place, like Trish and Roger and me. Roger lived not too many blocks from where I grew up. He had a paper route that actually was the next one over from when we lived on 7th Street before they tore our house down.
Jim Burke, too.
Yeah, and Jim Burke was right there, too. Yeah.
As I did.
Yeah, Jim only lived about 6 blocks from us. Just an interesting thing is what I'm getting at, you know. And so we have some cultural things we can talk about because we lived through them in the 60s and early 70s, where you guys didn't in that setting. And so when you bring people together in a group like this, we have one thing in common, the culture of being a Christian. But understanding other people isn't always easy. So you have all these Hellenistic Jews, and then you had the Palestinian Jews. The thing they had in common was the Old Testament scripture. What they didn't have in common was necessarily anything else. And that creates some problems sometimes. That's all behind it. Number 3 is the proposal pleased the whole group. They were, okay, so they were consensus builders too. Isn't that interesting? I think that's really important in a congregation today. We build consensus. We don't just jump out and peddle our point. We build a consensus. We talk about it. Does it fit the ministry? Is it ministry? If it's not ministry, it doesn't belong here. Simple as that. Okay? That's why, this morning's sermon is important. You may have been catching on to a theme in many sermons lately about unity. Okay? Because having this vacancy for so long leads to stress. Even if you don't feel it, it's there in the congregation. It only takes one person, all of a sudden you got a fissure, another split. We have to keep working together to build unity, and that's all based on Christ. Okay? So, finally, the church council, which is the group of all disciples, the voters, they came up with a solution, and that's we're going to have people dedicated. This is their job in the ministry of the congregation. And these are those 7 guys that you heard about. Sometimes you may have heard them referred to as the 7 deacons. That's a term that was given to them after Paul wrote to Timothy, chapter 3 of his first letter, and he talks about the qualifications of the deacons. They're not called deacons here, okay? So there you have the bishop, or the elder, or the shepherd. Those are the 3 words used for our current term pastor, okay? And then right after that, those who are other servants in the congregation, they're not the called pastor, but they're the ones that support ministry. And the qualifications are pretty similar, aren't they? Just not as many, okay? So what do they do after they choose them? They pray and install them. That's the laying on of hands. So everybody knew this is God working through his church for these people. We do the same thing with our church council in January, or usually early February, right? We install the church council. That's what we do. Okay? Kind of important. All right. Any questions on this? What's interesting, 2 guys go out and start preaching right away. So they went beyond what the initial thing was. Stephen, of course, and then you got Philip next time. Okay, no questions on this?
How about the priest that came?
Okay, yeah. As the church continues to grow, it's kind of like an addendum to the actual story. We're dealing with increasing growth, and this is one of the problems that came up as a result. Here's how it was fixed. And, oh, by the way, it kept on growing even after that, and now we even have priests. Now, this is something you just put in your back pocket a little bit later on when you see what goes on with the Apostle Paul, and what's the group of people that are kind of following him around and causing trouble. They're called Judaizers. A lot of those were people from, like the priests, who wanted Old Testament plus New Testament. What I mean by Old Testament Mosaic law, the rules. So, and of course Christ fulfilled all those. The whole letter to Colossians is written about that, because in Colossae it kind of peaked there. Okay? Thank you. Yeah. So some of those priests the Spirit finally cracked into those stone hearts. Yeah, that's kind of good. But then there's a residual problem later on. Okay? All right. The next one is Stephen. The Greek name for Stephen is Stephanos. You know what Stephanos means?
Crown.
What kind of crown?
A victory crown.
A victory crown, a wreath crown. Very good. Yeah, she's the pastor's favorite student, just so you know. The other word for crown in the New Testament is diadem. A diadem is what the king wears. A Stephanos is what an Olympic champion wears. And so, be faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of life. What kind of crown do you think? That's a Stephanos, the victory crown. It's not the king crown, even though we're kings and priests. Okay? Just a thought. So Stephanos, here Stephen has the name crown of victory, and he's going to get that crown as he dies here. So the story, Stephen is a man full, this is a quote, full of God's grace and power, who spoke with the wisdom the Spirit gave him. That's a direct quote there on the first bullet point. A man full of grace. What does that mean to you? A person who's full of grace.
Undeserved love he gives.
Yeah, you can see it written all over his life. Undeserved love. From his personal faith to the way he dealt with people. What about the word power? The Greek word for power is dynamite. Dynamis.
Explosive.
The power. Many people believe he was somebody who did miracles. Okay?
He already did miracles.
Yeah. Okay? So that would be the PowerPoint. PowerPoint, that's not power, the point of power. And then wisdom the Spirit gave him. So the wisdom that Stephen had, and I suspect all the apostles, came from the Holy Spirit, gave them the wisdom they needed to carry out their ministries. I think that might be important. Mm-hmm. And how does the Spirit impart wisdom?
Giving us the words.
Yeah,
Giving them the words.
right. Through the Word.
They give him the wisdom of the Spirit of God.
Fear of God, faith. Yeah. So all of that together, the Holy Spirit works through the Word primarily, though, to give us wisdom. What else? And by the way, we talked about this Corinthians class a couple weeks ago, remember? The wisdom of the world and the foolishness of the cross. So the wisdom we're talking about doesn't look like the wisdom of the world. And yet experience is also a pretty good teacher, right? So this is not a man who is, 20 years old. He's been around. In fact, all 7 of these guys had the respect of the fellow members. Pretty important, right? You don't want somebody on your church council who just got out of prison 6 months earlier. That has nothing to do with forgiveness or anything. It has to do with how he's viewed. You got to kind of be around a while, right? Shouldn't be a recent convert, that kind of thing. Kind of important. Now, if you're doing prison ministry, maybe that switches that up a little bit. Okay, opposition to Stephen's ministry. Yeah, I asked the question, what was he called to do? Help the widows. What did he do? He preached and did evangelism. Okay. From where did the opposition come to Stephen's ministry?
The synagogue of the freedmen
Okay, that's part of it.
and the Jews of Cyrene and Alexandria.
Is that what you said, Karen?
Sanhedrin.
The Sanhedrin, but in particular, people from Cyrene. Where's Cyrene?
North coast of Africa?
Yeah, it's modern-day Libya, and it was the capital at the time of that area. Okay? And then Alexandria.
Egypt.
That was the capital of Egypt at this time. Alexandria, an important city.
Under the ocean now.
Yeah, but it's where the Septuagint was translated too. The Old Testament Hebrew Bible translated into Greek. Yeah. Also, Cilicia and Asia. Where are they? Don't tell me China. That's not Asia of the Roman world. It's modern-day Turkey. Yeah, Asia and Cilicia are part of modern-day Turkey. So you have people on the southern end of the Med and the northern end, northeastern end of the Med. Okay? And where did these, the problem came with the widows, the Hellenistic Jews? These are all people from those regions, okay? And that's why we suspect that even Stephen was living in the Hellenistic area, and he would have been Jewish, right? He even gives a Greek name. Whereas the last one of the sevens is not. He was a convert. But so he's getting opposition from the people that he would be part of the group. And that's where the freedmen comes from, the synagogue of the freedmen. Now, what does that tell you? Freed?
They were slaves.
They were slaves, yeah, but they were also people from the Hellenistic world. People think Stephen was from that group, okay? Now, we can't be certain of it, but it would fit, right? Where do you get the most criticism? At home. Yeah. Okay? And how did they handle Stephen? Remember? Well, first they argued with him. And then they would go like this. Like a 2-year-old who doesn't want to hear mom say, pick up your clothes. Right? Silly. Well, they did more than that. What was their motive behind trying to shut Stephen up? It was jealousy. People were listening to him, not us anymore. Okay? Jealousy. What's behind jealousy? What's the basic sin behind jealousy?
Feel threatened, yes.
What's the basic sin, though? Both of those.
Greed.
No?
Selfishness, hatred.
Selfishness is getting close. Pride. Pride. If you're a humble, then you don't get jealous.
Right before the fall.
That's exactly the point. Yeah. All right. And do the ends justify the means? Well, it never does, doesn't it? But to get rid of him, they lied. Well, as long as we get what we need out of this, it doesn't matter. Sometimes in modern times, that's called situation ethics. You know, the situation dictates what's right and wrong and how you use stuff. That's not true. What's right and wrong is always right and wrong. The situation may dictate if you use law or gospel, but not switching that, okay? Now, we want to be ethical, don't get me wrong. Ethical just means doing the right thing. But today, how do you know what the right thing is in society? So that's one of the challenges we have today. But the end doesn't justify the means. They thought it did. As long as we get rid of this guy, he's a thorn in our flesh, he makes us look bad. So we're going to say he is a blasphemer. Now, what does the word blaspheme mean?
Lying against the Holy Spirit.
Well, that's one kind of blasphemy. It's
Denying God's Christ. Denying Christ is God.
blasphemy is saying something that is a lie opposed to the Word of God. Okay? So when Jesus claimed that he is God, they called him a blasphemer, right, in his trial? All right. Stephen, though, now is going to prove that the accusation is absolutely incorrect. Because his whole sermon now is defense. That's the line there, Stephen defense. The truth is that salvation is found in Jesus, not the temple, not temple practice, not the Old Testament worship. And he's going to go with that theme throughout this to show that he was doing God's word here and that he wasn't blaspheming at all. And it's interesting, people that watched him noticed that his face shone like that of an angel. Did you catch that? If you're reading as I talk. I don't know if he had a special glow about him or something, but the fact is, he is an angel. How so? Yeah, he's a messenger. The word angel is just the word that means a messenger. That's how the angels got named angels, because they were messengers of God. Right? So the angelos. There's even a city of angels. They don't look too angelic, but out there to the west of us. Now, so he is an angel, and why is he shining as he's proclaiming the word? Luke is really good at picking up these illustrations, these practical things that come out of Jesus' ministry.
Sets him apart from everybody else.
Okay,
To listen.
okay. Let's think of the picture of light here a second.
Draws the people
Yeah, but it's more specific, I think. Luke knows this inside out. When he writes it, he's thinking of who the light is. Jesus is the light of the world. And he says that a city on a hill can't be hidden. He's talking about believers. So let your light shine upon people so that they might see your good works and glorify. I think there's an allusion to that here. Luke certainly understood that point. I think you might even find it in the Gospel of Luke. And so he's picking up on the fact that he's preaching the gospel. He's reflecting the light of Christ when he's preaching the word. And he had a goal in mind. Stephen's goal was not saving himself. His goal was his hearers. And so he's going to bring the law to bear. And then the gospel. So all that's on my mind as I'm preaching the sermon this morning. It's all part of the same thing, law and gospel, law and gospel. Okay? So his message is simply that he was called by the God of glory. Now I'm reading that, and of course my Hebrew mind is starting to run with me. And I know something about the Shekinah of God. The Shekinah, that's the Kavod Adonai. Kavod is the word glory in Hebrew. And Adonai is the word for the true God, Jehovah. So the glory of God. And what is the glory of God? When it appears in the Old Testament, it always appears in salvation.
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus is the glory of God. So you have the fact that he's called by the glory of God. Any Jewish person is going to pick up on that glory of the Lord, the Kavod Adonai. Doesn't matter. They're always going to pick up on it. I always have to teach it or restate it for you because we don't think like Jews. Right? These are all people that grew up in the Old Testament faith. So God himself in his glory calls him, and he's alluding here in particular to Genesis 15, where the glory of the Lord first appears in the Old Testament. In verse 6, Genesis 15, verse 6, Abram believed, and it was credited to him for righteousness. And after that, the Lord shows him his glory. He has him put this pathway made up of carcasses of dead animals and birds. Remember that? And then he's shooing the birds away because he doesn't want them to eat that. And all of a sudden, the Lord reveals himself in that smoking fire pot, a pot of coals, and comes swishing through there. See, that's the old Babylonian blood covenant ritual where two kings making a treaty would go arm in arm through this thing. And of course, the imagery was if you violate the treaty, you're going to become like one of these dead animals. But Abraham did not go through with God. It was a one-sided covenant, this gospel covenant, not two-sided. The law code, of course, is two-sided. We will do everything that is written in the book of the law. And God said, you do everything and I'll be your God. Two-sided. The law is two-sided. The problem is God keeps up his end all the time, and we fail in our end. So we needed this other covenant. Well, remember, Stephen is talking to fellow Jews here. And so he can use the pictures, and they will readily pick up on it. Especially the priests that were there, which is interesting that he says many priests believe, and now we got this. But this seems to be coming out of the outlying regions, okay? He talks about Abraham's call to faithfulness, and then takes them through Egypt, and talks about how God led Abraham's family there for 400 years. And so what he's doing is they're accusing him of blaspheming, of not saying the truth about the scriptures. And he's going through every major point that the Jews held to and saying, this is what God was doing, and this is what I believe, basically, right? Don't you dare call me a blasphemer. Here's what I believe, same as you. The thing is, you don't believe what God promised is fulfilled. That's what he comes to. So he talks about the famine that got him there and the deliverance by Joseph. Met with somebody yesterday, and they had gone to see Joseph in his Technicolor dream coat. We saw that one time years ago. Hey, Liz, 30 years ago when we were in California. It's a good production. It's not all that biblically sound. but that's okay. Through Joseph, and of course after Jacob dies, what does Joseph, what does he have to do? His brothers come to him trembling, thinking he's going to take revenge on them because of what they did to him. And what does he say?
It was God's will that you did this to me.
What you intended for bad, God intended for good.
Yeah. What you did, that was evil, sinful. God turned it around to good. He made the bad thing on purpose so that I could be here to save many people alive. So I'm not going to kick against God. Now there's a lesson that's why I brought this up for us. There's a lesson in this, right? Not everything works out in life the way we plan. In fact, most things seem not to. But if you don't plan, then nothing works. It's just one of those weird things. Now, why is it that God does that so often in our lives? When man proposes, God disposes. Isn't that to show that he's in charge? And then we turn and when we're through something, we look back and we go, that's what the Lord was doing. You ever notice that? Now, not always, but a lot of times, at least in my personal life. I don't know church life, but even then, I've been around long enough that I could tell you, there are times when you're looking at something, you go, if we would have done what our plans were at this particular time, in this particular congregation, it would have not opened the doors to be able to make sure we could still preach the gospel in Prescott. I mean, that's the whole thing behind the merger. Had nothing to do with anything else but that we don't lose a spot to preach the gospel in town. And apparently God's blessing that. How we got to that, I never would have guessed that 10 years ago. Okay? So God still does what he did through Joseph. He does it through us today. Okay? And then he talks about the slavery and deliverance through Moses. And basically, he's, if you want to read more on that, Hebrews chapter 11, 23 covers that. In fact, a lot of these things are in Hebrews 11, the faith chapter. By faith, by faith, by faith, right? Okay? And then what you see him talking about with the burning bush and 40 years in the wilderness and the problem with the people of Israel, is that they never learned. As a group, they never learned. Individuals, yeah, but as a group. They continued to put the Lord to the test. They continued to be rebellious against God's will and his plan. Because they had a better plan than God did. And of course, the illusion is to these people. You're just like your forefathers. Because you see this far from you, you can't see what the scriptures were all about. And it's a call to repentance. Wake up. Okay? And that happens to us once in a while too in life, I think. Don't you? We're so close to something we can't see the bigger picture. I think that happens when we're suffering, maybe more than any other time, where you can't see past the aches and the pains. Is that true? That's why we visit the sick, because it's an important time. Or if somebody, a spouse dies, a widow or widower, that's a tough time, especially if you've been married a long time. And of course, when that happens and they're long-time believers, okay, they know what you're going to tell them, they believe it, but the grief gets in the way, the loss gets in the way, and so we have to sometimes help people there. And I'm probably no different, if that ever happened to me, you'll be doing that for me, I hope. Okay? So, this is an easy part of the lesson, he goes through all of that, all the way up to Joseph leading him into the promised land. Moses couldn't go in either, right? Because he rebelled that one time.
One time it was recorded.
Well, that's the time because he did it out in the open. Everybody saw his rebellion, and there's much more required of a leader of God's people. That happens today too, at least it should. If a pastor has a moral letdown. Now, we all sin, I'm the only pastor that doesn't sin, right? Ask Liz. But I don't think I've ever committed adultery with any of the members. In fact, I know I haven't. But that would disqualify me from ministry. Okay? Not from forgiveness. but for ministry. It'd be an open rebellion, and I'm supposed to be an example to the flock. Okay? I'm supposed to be. That's my job. But I hope I would be no matter what. Okay? So Moses, that's what happened with him. His was hitting the rock instead of speaking to it, right? Okay. Key points in all of his thing was the covenant, the deliverance. A prophet like Moses is coming. That's from Deuteronomy 18. The tabernacle. See, the Jews of the time thought that the temple was the only jump-off point to heaven, and all the ritual that was put into temple worship. What's starting to happen in the New Testament church, at least in dealing with the Jewish people, is to let them know the temple never really did have anything. It's just because the sacrifices were there that pointed ahead to the sacrifice that happened when Christ was on the cross. We don't need a temple. But he goes back to the tabernacle. See, the tabernacle was there longer than the temple. At least it felt that way to the people. All right? Okay. And then the sacrifices. And then I quoted this because this is kind of the conclusion. This shows you where his heart was. It wasn't defending himself as much as defending the Word of God and calling to repentance. You stiff-necked people with uncircumcised hearts and ears, you are just like your fathers. You always resist the Holy Spirit. Was there ever a prophet your fathers did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. That's a synonym for Jesus, right? And now you have betrayed and murdered him. You who have received the law that was put into effect through angels, but not have obeyed it. They got so ticked off that the ones that were accusing him would be the first to throw the stones, and they gave their outer garments to Saul before his name changed, and he gave approval to it. Very important, because Paul's going to have that theme, I'm the least of all the disciples. Right? And of course, the outcome, they stoned him to death, and physical persecution began in the church in Jerusalem. Herod kills James quickly after this. And we'll talk about this next time, but I think it was the Holy Spirit's way to get those people off their butts. See, he said, I want you to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea. They did pretty good with that. Samaria and the uttermost part of the earth. They weren't leaving Jerusalem, so God forced them out. Sometimes he does that to us today, too. It's just that we only can look back in hindsight to see that. You know, we're not here for ourselves, in other words. We're here to preach the gospel in all the world. Okay. Hopefully that will get you to read this part of the scriptures and reflect on it and double check what I'm saying. But Stephen was not a blasphemer. He was a faithful witness, and as a result of his faithful witness, he became the first New Testament person to give up his life for the faith, for Jesus. The word that was given is martyr. The word martyr, martyrion in the Greek, is just witness. And here is specialized version of witness, a saint. We're all saints. The martyrs were sainted for Christ. They were physically killed as a result. So martyrs, every believer witnesses to the faith. But there are martyrs that witness with their death as well. By the way, just one final note here. I know there's kind of a going thing today where even Christians sometimes say, I don't want people to have to go through the trauma of a funeral. Guess what? It's the most important thing and the kickoff to the grieving process. Funeral's the last chance you get in your life to witness to Jesus. And if you've ever been to the funerals, at least mine, you will hear that message. This person believed in Jesus. That's why we're here today. And so it's not a memorial. It's not what do they call it? A celebration of life. That's so silly. The person's dead. Oh yeah, we'll celebrate their past life. No, I'm going to celebrate the life of Christ that gives us life forever. This one's going to rise again. This is the end. At any rate, that's my plea. It's good to have a funeral. It really is. Now, if you don't, it's an adiaphron. You know, I'm not going to bring down God's curse on you or anything like that after you're dead. But it gives you a chance. I thought about that with Sandy Smith's funeral the other day. There were at least a dozen people there that weren't Christian. And one of them came up to talk to me afterwards. That's why, what a great time to be an evangelist. Even though I know emotionally it's traumatic.
I think part of the fading away from funerals is the cost of a funeral. If you're not affiliated with a church, you could do it.
Well, I charge a lot.
$20,000 to have a funeral, and I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. By the way, just so you all know, if you want to have a niche in the columbarium, you might want to make that decision before the end of the year when the price is going up, because they have never changed it over there since they built it, and the $500 for a couple doesn't cover the stones that get put in. The prices have gone up, but they didn't do that. So we need to have that fund growing in perpetuity, I think it is, so that things can be taken care of. So I think right now, what's the price right now? Does anybody remember? It's
For Columbia.
it's 400 and 800, right? Yeah. And it's going up to, what, 1,500, I think. So, and we have to cover the costs, so. That's a lot cheaper than Grace in Glendale, 2,800.
Put a tree over me.
I didn't know they had one there.
They just finished it.
They just-
So 2 years old, maybe? All right, let's close with prayer. I don't even know what time. Are we over our time? Sorry.
Yes.
And another thing, brought to you by Chester. Oh, let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your holy word and example men like Stephen have still give us in the church today. Help us to learn from the early Christian church about standing up for the truth, but also with compassion and love for those that are needy among us. Lord, bless us for your glory's sake and the welfare of souls. Amen. Thank you.